Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. I'm here today with a wrap up for June, not July, because I am just being terrible with doing wrap ups on time. Luckily, this is going to be a little bit shorter than some of my recent wrap-ups. I read about 26 books, including a couple novellas, and plus a lot of the books that I'm going to be talking about I already talked about in my smutty romances video, but let's just get started. I'm going to talk about them in the order that I read them, which thank you Goodreads for keeping track of what I read. The first book that I read in June was American Fairy Tale by Adriana Herrera. This is book 2 in her Dreamer series, which I've been loving this year. I listened to this one in audio, but I have the paperback because I just needed to have the whole series in paperback. Luckily, Harlequin had a whole buy 2 get 2 free, so I just bought the rest of the books that I needed. This one I gave 4 stars. It wasn't quite as perfect as the first book was, which I gave 5 stars to, but it was still amazing. I still enjoyed it so much. It is an MM romance. Most of the books in the series are MM, and one of these heroes, Milo, is a social worker, and he ends up falling for this really rich billionaire named Tom. Milo and Tom actually first meet at this little gala where they have a hookup. They don't know who the other person is, but they have a very nice time together. So it is quite a surprise when Tom shows up at Milo's work, where he's a social worker as a new benefactor. Money does become a bit of a problem between these two because Milo doesn't really want to have anything to do with that rich life that Tom is a part of, which is a bit of a difficult thing for Tom to deal with because all he really wants to do is just to give everything to Milo. Still, the romance is super fun, sexy, really heartwarming. I just enjoyed these two a lot. I love the way that they learn each other, learn each other's boundaries, and learn to communicate. There's a really great cast of secondary characters. Like, this whole cast of characters for the whole Dreamer series is just A+. I love how supportive everyone is. The cast is very diverse, lots of Afro-Latinx characters. It was just a really great second book to the series, and I actually ended up reading book 3, American Love Story, as soon as I finished the audio for American Fairy Tale. I literally just binge listened to all 3 books in the series. I couldn't do the 4th just because I had to put it on hold. But yes, I finally got to book 3, which I really enjoyed as well. I also gave this one 4 stars. This is the 3rd MM romance in the series between an activist professor hero and a very privileged assistant district attorney hero. There is a lot of great talk and discussion about privilege, white privilege, police brutality, and the whole injustice system that is very anti-Black. That aspect of the story I thought was really well written and very well incorporated with the romance, which I adored. Patrice, the Haitian professor, and Easton, who is the assistant DA, they come from very different backgrounds, and even though they want each other, the chemistry between them is always on fire. Patrice thinks that being with Easton means that he'll have to compromise on his beliefs, and Easton wants to be with someone who doesn't constantly push him away as Patrice does. So these two do have a lot to work on regarding their relationship, but again, I love the learning process between these two. Like in book 2, when they start working on their relationship, that's when you can tell that they're definitely meant to be together no matter, the kind of backgrounds that they come from. Next, I listened to the 2 books in Rebecca Weatherspoon's Loose End series, Rafe and Zenny, which I do have in paperback. It is so pretty. Rafe book 1 was actually a reread, though it was my first time listening to the audiobook. This one is a single mother heroine and a male nanny kind of romance. Sloane, our single mother heroine, is a doctor. She's a surgeon, one of the youngest Black female surgeons, so she's a pretty big deal, and she's fairly newly divorced and needs someone to help her take care of her twin daughters. This is where Rafe comes in, our buff male nanny. Rafe is a cinnamon roll role of a hero. He is so sweet to Sloane, to the girls. Their romance is just very soft and no big dramatics or anything. These two characters are people who know who they are, who own who they are. Rafe is definitely a beta kind of hero, nothing like your domineering alpha, which I do love to read. Sloane's girls are so funny and so cute. I loved all of their interactions. I gave this one 4 stars, though I do think that I enjoyed it a little bit more when I read it the first time. It is a very feel-good kind of romance, highly recommend it. And then book 2 is Zenny. We get a little taste of Zenny's romance at the end of Rafe, where we find out that Zenny all of a sudden just got married. So this one is a marriage of convenience with a very thick Scottish hero. Both the main characters in Zenny are actually plus size and bisexual. This one I also gave 4 stars, though I will admit that the audio was not the best choice to read this book because for some reason the narrator is male and British, which I don't really understand the choice in doing that. He has an English accent and neither Zenny nor Mason have English accents. Mason has a Scottish accent. I'm not sure why they didn't just go with an American female voice narrator, which would have made sense for Zenny. So that did bring my experience reading this book a little bit down, but the story itself is fine. It's great. I love marriage of conveniences, especially modern ones, just because I don't really see them as often as I do like in historical romances. The reason for this marriage of convenience is that Zenny needs to claim her inheritance, but in order to do that, she has to marry someone. Mason, the hero, was a dear friend to Zenny's late aunt, and he also was given a sum of money, but only if he would marry Zenny. Like book 1, Zenny isn't really all that dramatic or angsty. It's very feel-good, very fun. Zenny and Mason try to make the most of their marriage. Mason is a sweetheart of a hero. They have discussions on their sexualities, their experiences with biphobia. It's a great marriage of convenience romance. If you love the trope, I would just recommend you read it rather than listen to the audiobook. My next book is a smutty novella. It is My Hero's Secret Baby by Mink. Here we have a mafia hero. Mink has a lot of mafia heroes in her smutty novellas, but this one I did enjoy. I gave this one 3 stars. It wasn't amazing or anything, but I did have fun reading it. Our heroine is a super sweet and innocent kindergarten teacher, and the hero, the mafia guy, ends up saving her from this attack, so she now worships him and thinks he is a hero and a very good guy, which he's not. So he tries to hide who he is from her, but that doesn't really work out all that well when the mafia people that he's involved with try to take her away. There's a secret baby, a kidnapping. It's all very entertaining. It's not my favorite from Ming, but I still liked it. I also read another novella from Ming, his Tiger Queen, and yes, there is literally a tiger in this one. I also gave it 3 stars. It wasn't anything impressive, and the whole tiger thing did bring me out of it, but I mean, it was fine. The heroine is like Jasmine from Aladdin. She has a pet tiger who she helped raise. The heroine has been sheltered her whole life until her father tells her that he is making her marry someone. Her fiance is the hero's brother, and of course when the hero first lays eyes on the heroine, he knows that he's not about to let his brother marry her. It's very over the top. Again, there is a tiger who can understand the heroine. There's a bit of a mafia aspect, and again, I thought it was okay. Next, I read The Dare by Elle Kennedy, which is book 4 in the Briar U series, which is a spin-off of the Off Campus series. Sadly, this one is my new least favorite book in the series. It wasn't bad. I gave it 3.5 stars, which is a rating that means that I still enjoyed it. I just have some problems as well. Here we finally have Connor's book. Connor was introduced in the last book in book 3, and I was so excited for him because I loved the way that he was portrayed. He is the biggest player on campus since Dean from the Off-Campus series, but it turns out he's actually a total sweetheart of a guy. He's been getting a little tired of hookups, of the parties, so when Taylor comes into his life asking him to pretend to hook up with her at a party, he becomes very, very intrigued, and it's from here that they start a fake relationship friendship, which is super fun and cute. They genuinely become friends at first. Connor is the nicest guy ever, and he actually does want to make this fake relationship into something real, but Taylor is one who holds off from this. She has some deep-seated insecurities that prevent her from taking that step with Connor. She's a curvy heroine, though I wouldn't say this book has the best kind of plus-size rep, but her insecurities about her looks makes her think that she's nowhere near on the level that Connor is because he's like a gorgeous Greek god. I understood her insecurities, but it did take up such a big part of the book that I got really tired of reading it after a while, especially when Connor has given no indication that he ever saw Taylor in the way that she sees herself. So that was the main reason why I couldn't rate this one or enjoy this one more. Still, I do love Elle Kennedy and her new adult college romances, so if she does write some more, maybe in the series, maybe in a new series, I'm definitely reading it. Next, I read Ransom by Julie Garwood. It's historical romance, book 2 in the Highlands Laird series, and a sequel to The Secret. The Secret is one of my favorite books that I read this year, so I was really excited to dive into this sequel. This one I gave 4 stars. I didn't love it quite as much as The Secret, mainly because there's just so much going on. We have 2 simultaneous romances happening in this one with Broderick and Ramsay, who were introduced in The Secret. At the end of The Secret, these 2 left for England to try to find English brides like Judith, the heroine from The Secret. Sadly, that didn't turn out as well as they'd hoped, so it's been a couple years since the end of The Secret. They're both back as the Lairds of their own clans. There's a lot of intrigue and mystery surrounding this plot. Gillian, one of the heroines who falls in love with Broderick, she's being forced by an evil baron to find this lost treasure that belonged in her family, so she needs to try to find her long-lost sister, who she believes is in the Highlands. She ends up getting Broderick to accompany her to the Highlands, and that's where she meets Bridget, our second heroine, who falls in love with Ramsay. Bridget is one of the most beautiful women in Ramsay's clan, and she's been rejecting all these proposals because she's in love with Ramsay. I genuinely love the friendship between Bridget and Gillian. These 2 are so funny together because they just bond over how clueless their men are. They're both headstrong, brave, and intelligent. Gillian goes through the most in this story. I did enjoy the romances, though I think it does get a little overshadowed over the overarching story. Plus, with 2 romances, it gets a little hard to focus on them when they keep flipping back and forth between the 2. There's just a lot going on. It is a thick book, much bigger than The Secret. Still, I do love the way Julie Garwood writes her historical romances, her medieval romances. It was amazing seeing Ian and Judith again. I really liked all 4 of our main characters, so if you like your historical romances with a good dose of intrigue, of action and drama, definitely read Ransom. Next, I read Night Song by Beverly Jenkins. This was part of the historical romance video that I did where I read new and old school romances, and this is one of the old school ones. It was published in 1994. It was the first book that Beverly Jenkins ever published. This one I gave 3 stars. It's definitely not my favorite from Beverly Jenkins. I was really into the book in the first half. We have a feisty school teacher who ends up falling for this sergeant whose cavalry is in town for a short while. They actually knew each other prior to this, and this time Chase, our sergeant hero, wants his chance to be with Kara. I really enjoyed these 2 characters. I thought Kara was so strong and Chase is very much a swoony and smooth man. I just thought their romance happened way too fast. Like, Kara was already confessing her love in the first 30%, I think, and after that Chase had to leave to do cavalry things. They just weren't able to spend enough time together physically. Plus, there is a lot of info dumping about the historical time period, which is interesting, but it does slow down the story a lot. Overall, this was okay for me, although I do want to say if you love mustaches on your guys, on your heroes, you'll probably love Chase because his mustache is talked about constantly. Next, I read 2 Sherry Thomas historical romances. The last 2 books in the Fitzhugh trilogy. Book 2 is Ravishing the Heiress, and Book 3 is Tempting the Bride. I absolutely loved Book 1, so I was really excited to finish up the series. Sadly, I did not like Book 2, but I really enjoyed Book 3. Ravishing the Heiress was quite the frustrating read. It's a marriage of convenience. The heroine has been in love with the hero since forever, but of course he doesn't know that. He's actually in love with another woman, but he is forced to enter this marriage and feels very, very bitter that he's not able to be with the woman that he loves. Millie and Fitz make a deal with each other. The first 8 years of their marriage, they won't go into bed with each other. They won't consummate their marriage. He can have whatever and how many mistresses that he wants. She will be the perfect wife for him. So this deal I was not a fan of. Fitz having endless mistresses throughout his marriage, I did not like. Millie being okay with all these mistresses, I did not like. I did appreciate that they become really good friends through their marriage, but I just hated Fitz, to be honest. He spends about 80-ish% of the book in love with another woman who does show up, of course, but this time she is no longer married, so immediately Fitz tries to be with her because she is the woman that he's been in love with his whole life. I was just really tired of his character from pretty early on, and it did not get better. Millie, I did feel really, really bad for, but at the same time, she knew exactly what she was going into, which was marrying a man who's not in love with her and is in love with someone else. What really did annoy me, though, was the fact that after those 8 years, when they finally consummate their marriage, all of a sudden Fitz realizes, oh, I actually am in love with my wife. That happened way too suddenly and way too late. So I didn't like his character at all. He doesn't even talk about, feeling bad about having those mistresses. So I gave this one 2 stars. It probably could be a 1. If not for Sherry Thomas's writing, which I love so much. She is such a fantastic writer, but she just wrote the worst hero ever in this one. So this book was a pretty big letdown, especially after how much I loved Beguiling the Beauty. Luckily, I did not hate Book 3, Tempting the Bride. Here we finally have Helena and David's book. Their story has kind of been teased throughout the first 2 books. What's interesting about this series is that we do get a couple chapters in each book from secondary characters from the other siblings, the other Fitzhugh siblings. So we've been teased about Helena and David for quite a while. Theirs is an enemies to lovers romance. It is marriage of convenience, and it's also got a freaking amnesia trope, and I loved that aspect of it. David and Helena have hated each other since they were kids, though technically it was more hate on Helena's side because David was actually in love with her, and because he was in love with her and she didn't reciprocate those feelings, he treated her horribly, which only makes her hate of him grow even more. Helena and David have some fantastic banter and chemistry together. Anytime they're in a room together, they just butt heads and sparks fly. It's great. And this time, Helena gets herself into a compromise situation and she's forced to marry David, but literally the day after that they elope, Helena gets in a little accident and has amnesia and literally forgets all about David and that she hates him. So here, David sees this as his chance to make his wife fall in love with him, all the while being terrified that she'll remember all of her memories. It's super angsty. The entire series is full of angst. I gave this one 4 stars. It's 3.5, 4 stars. It was much, much better than Book 2, but Book 1 is still my favorite of the series. These next couple books I'll go through pretty quickly just because I talk so much about them in my smutty novellas video. I read Against the Rules by Ella Good. This one I gave 3 stars. Friends to Lovers, it was fine. I read 2 Izzy Slam books that were absolutely pure filth. I read 2 Isla Chu books, which were sadly very disappointing just because the smut was not there. I wanted more steam. And then I read all 3 books in the Them Boys series by Alexandria House. This series was fantastic. I loved it so much. These are smutty novellas, but they are so steamy and so romantic. These brothers are absolutely amazing with their heroines. They are over the top with how much they love them. The reading order is Set, Jaw, and Shoe. Set, the first book, was my favorite. I gave it 5 stars, and then the next 2 books I gave 4 stars. This was my first time reading Alexandria House. It was a recommendation from my friend Charles, Books on Stereo. Thank you, Charles, for this, because now I am the biggest fan of Alexandria House. I've already finished another series from her, and I'm working on another one. Her romances are so freaking swoony. I love the way her heroes love their heroines. If you love heroes who just flat out adore their heroines, who worship the grounds that they walk on, you need to read Alexandria House. The last of my smutty novellas is Stocking Stuffers by Erin McClellan. This was my first time reading this author, and it was such a great read. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It's a Christmas novella, so if you loved reading Christmas stories, Christmas romances during the summer, now is the perfect time. We have a grumpy bisexual heroine who absolutely hates Christmas. The hero is totally a beta hero, shy and blushing when it comes to the heroine, and he loves Christmas and is a huge romantic. They're total opposites, and they meet at a bed and breakfast where they're both kind of stranded in because of a snowstorm. I loved how empowered and sexual the heroine is. She teaches the hero a couple things in the bedroom. It was a very feel-good romance. It made me wish that Christmas was already here, and now I really need to read more Erin McClellan books because her writing was fantastic, and she does have a couple other like holiday themed books in the series, one for Valentine's Day and one for 4th of July. And then I read The Wild Heir by Karina Halley. This is book 2 in her Nordic Royal series. I gave this one 3 stars, like I gave the first book. Sadly, they didn't impress me as much as book 3 did, which I read first and a while ago. Magnus is the Crown Prince of Norway. He's a huge adrenaline junkie, and he's been arranged to marry Princess Isabella, who is not at all impressed by him or his playboy ways. This is kind of a fake dating, marriage at convenience kind of thing, but they're mostly stuck in an engagement. Magnus needs to improve his reputation, so he needs to show that he's willing and able to marry. There's lots of great banter, but honestly, these characters didn't leave quite that big of an impression on me. It was just very okay, and book 3, A Nordic King, is still my favorite of the series. Next, I read The Player Next Door by K.A. Tucker, and this one I gave 3.5 stars. It is a second chance romance, single parent hero, enemies to lovers, at least on the heroine's part. Scarlett hasn't forgiven Shane for breaking her heart 12 years ago when he dumped her and moved on to another girl and just forgot about her after falling in love one summer, and now she's back in their small town and moves in literally next door to Shane, much to her surprise. She's also his son's new teacher. Shane wants something more again, Scarlett does not, but Shane is very determined and very sweet and swoony. Shane has his regrets. Scarlett is very stubborn. She does get stubborn to a point of frustration, but I didn't really appreciate that Shane just basically said get over it, over what happened 10 years ago. But I did enjoy this for the most part. It has very summery, small town feels. It's not quite the sweet and fluffy book that I kind of expected when I read the blurb. There's quite some miscommunication and drama that goes along with it, but still it's an entertaining read. It's quick, I had a fun time with it, and I'm still glad I read it. Next, I read Evie Drake Starts Over by Linda Holmes. This is a fiction novel, women's fiction with some romance in it, which is why I read it. I gave this one 3 stars. I wish I could have rated it higher, but I just had a hard time concentrating on the story. Evie is newly widowed, but what everyone doesn't know is that she was actually about to leave her husband right before he died. Dean, our hero, moves into the apartment that's in the back of Evie's house. He's a former baseball player, and they actually become really good friends. There's a lot of self-reflection for these two. They go on a bit of a journey to rediscover who they are. I liked Evie and Dean. Their romance is very slow burn, but I did get a little bored with them sometimes. I did wish that the story would pick up at points, but still it was an okay read. It was really popular last year, so I wanted to see what was the big deal, but sadly I just didn't love it as much as everyone else did. Next, I read one of my favorite books this year, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This is like a fantasy magical type of book with a great romance, though it does take a back seat, but I still loved it anyway. It is so adorable, so charming. I loved the heck out of this book, and once I read it I could see why so many people loved it. I gave this one 5 stars. It was fantastic. We have our main character Linus, who goes to visit this orphanage to take notes on it and report back to the government department where he works at. It's at this orphanage that he meets these particular children who have some interesting magical powers. I just loved all of these characters so much. All the kids, all the orphans, each of them had such a unique and special personality. They were hilarious and adorable. My favorites are Chauncey and Lucy. Lucy is literally the Antichrist, Lucifer, and Chauncey has an obsession with being the best bellhop ever. I just adore all of these kids so much. The romance between Linus and Arthur is super sweet, very slow, but very wholesome. I just cannot recommend this book enough. I've already loved TJ Klune since reading Wolfsong, and now I'm an even bigger fan of his now. The second to last book that I read in June is This Time Tomorrow by Tessa Bailey. This is book 2 in our Phenomenal Fate series, her vampire romance series, and this one I gave 3 stars. I definitely didn't enjoy it as much as I enjoyed the first book. Roxana and Elias were teased a bit in Reborn yesterday, and I was so excited to get to their story. It didn't quite live up to my expectations. There's just a couple things going on that I didn't really feel connected all that well. Like, the story just didn't flow all that well. There's this thing that happened and then another thing that happened, and it just didn't add up as well as it could have. This romance is kind of star-crossed lovers. We have a vampire falling for a vampire slayer. Roxana is supposed to kill Elias, but she can never really do it. I loved reading about how they first met because we never got that in the first book, even though we knew that they already knew each other. It was very much fated mates when they first met in Vegas, but sadly something really tragic happened to tear them apart, and now they can't really be together, with Roxana being like the heir of this vampire slayer kingdom. Elias is of course your typical Tessa Bailey hero, obsessed with the heroine, very alpha. This book wasn't bad, it was still okay. I just definitely expected a lot more, especially with a couple that was so hyped from book 1, but now the third couple has been so hyped in this second book. I won't say who the heroine is, but you do meet her in This Time Tomorrow, and Tucker's romance just sounds so good, so hopefully I'll enjoy that one more than this one. And the last book that I read in June is Say Yes to the Duke by Eloisa James. This is book 5 in the Wilds of Lindo Castle, the latest book in the series, and this is what the step back looks like. But I enjoy this one so much. I was surprised because I went into this a little wary just because my friend didn't like it, but I just adore this romance so much. It's very soft and very sweet, fairly low drama. If you love a big hulking hero who's a bit cold to everyone but the heroine, and a heroine who is small, shy, and sweet, but definitely grows a backbone, especially when it comes to the hero, you will probably enjoy this book. There were a lot of funny moments. I thought it was hilarious that Viola thinks she's in love with this vicar, and Devin, our Duke hero, sees him as competition. I love reading about a pursuing hero, and Devin is exactly that. He will do anything to make Viola fall in love with him and agree to marry him. It was just a really great romance. I loved how soft and sweet these two were, but the last 10 to 15% of this book I wasn't the biggest fan of. There were some strange things that happened in the vicar's house. I didn't really see the point of it, and it kind of derailed the story, but the romance itself is really wonderful. Devin and the way that he treated Viola like a queen made me swoon, and we are getting another wild book just because there are so many wild children, so I am looking forward to that book. And that is it for my wrap up, my very late wrap up for June. Let me know if you've read any of these. As always, links are in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!